I never imagined my own family would spend 20 years mocking me at every holiday dinner, every birthday, every single gathering where I sat quietly while they laughed behind their wine glasses. But the day my son stood up in front of all of them and told the truth about who I really was, I watched every single one of their faces turn pale. What would you have done if you spent 2 decades being called the family disappointment, only to discover that your own silence had been the most powerful thing you ever did? My name is Diane, and I'm 53 years old. For most of my adult life, I was the woman my family loved to pity. My sister Karen became a corporate attorney. My brother Mark ran a successful real estate firm. And me? I was just Diane who works some random office job, as my mother used to say with that particular tone of disappointment she perfected over the years. I want to tell you my story, not because I need sympathy, but because I think some of you watching this might be living through the same kind of quiet humiliation I endured for far too long. Have you ever sat at a family dinner table feeling completely invisible, like your accomplishments simply didn't count because they weren't loud enough? I grew up in a household where success was measured in titles and paychecks people could brag about at church. My father was a retired engineer who believed worth was tied directly to status. My mother adored anyone who made her look good in front of her friends. From a very young age, I understood that being quiet, being practical, being someone who worked behind the scenes instead of chasing applause, made me invisible in their eyes. Karen, my older sister, thrived under that pressure. She became the golden child early on, graduating top of her class, landing prestigious internships, marrying a man with a name everyone in town recognized. Mark, my younger brother, followed close behind, building a real estate empire that made our parents glow with pride every time his name came up. And then there was me. I chose a path nobody understood. After college, I took a quiet government analyst position that paid modestly and required confidentiality I could never explain at dinner parties. I couldn't talk about my work. I couldn't brag about promotions. I simply went to work, came home, and lived my life without ever correcting the assumptions people made about me. For 2 decades, every family gathering became its own quiet battlefield. My mother would ask Karen about her latest case, listen intently, nod proudly. She'd ask Mark about his newest property deal, beaming with admiration. Then she'd glance at me and ask, almost as an afterthought, "And how's your little office job going, Diane?" I would smile and give vague answers. I had to. My work wasn't something I could discuss, not in detail, not with people who had no security clearance and no patience for ambiguity. So I let them believe whatever they wanted. I let them believe I was simply unambitious, someone who never quite found her footing in life. Can you believe my own family did this to me for over 20 years? Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every single milestone celebration became another opportunity for them to remind me, subtly or not so subtly, that I was the family's biggest letdown. My ex-husband even used it against me during our divorce, telling the judge I lacked ambition, using my own family's narrative as ammunition. I raised my son Ethan mostly alone after that divorce. I worked long hours, often disappearing for stretches of time that I could never properly explain. Ethan grew up watching his grandparents praise his aunt and uncle while barely acknowledging his mother's existence in conversations. I saw the confusion in his eyes when he was young. The way he'd ask me why Grandma never bragged about me the way she bragged about Aunt Karen. There was one particular Christmas, about 8 years ago, that nearly shattered me completely. My mother stood up during dinner and made a toast, praising Karen's recent partnership at her law firm and Mark's expansion into commercial real estate. Then, almost as a joke, she turned to me and said in front of everyone, "And Diane, well, at least you show up on time." The room erupted in laughter. Even Ethan, who was 16 at the time, looked down at his plate, embarrassed for me. I excused myself to the bathroom and stood there gripping the sink, fighting back tears, wondering if I had wasted my entire life chasing something nobody would ever understand or respect. Have you ever experienced a moment where the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally made you feel completely worthless instead? That night, driving home, I genuinely considered whether I should just quit my career and find something I could brag about. Something tangible my family could finally respect. Here's what my family never knew. What I couldn't tell them even when their words cut the deepest. I wasn't just an office analyst. For 19 years, I worked in a classified capacity for a federal intelligence division, analyzing financial networks tied to international fraud and security threats. My quiet desk job was actually one of the most sensitive positions in my department, and my discretion wasn't laziness or lack of ambition. It was literally the job requirement. I had been recruited right out of graduate school, vetted extensively, and sworn to confidentiality that legally prevented me from discussing specifics with anyone, including my own family. Every promotion I received, every commendation, every successful case I closed remained locked away in classified files that no one outside my agency would ever see. I chose this path because I believed in protecting people, in doing meaningful work even if it meant sacrificing recognition. But sitting there year after year, absorbing my family's judgment, I started to wonder if the sacrifice was worth the loneliness it created. Ethan became my anchor during those difficult years. I never explained the full truth to him either, not because I didn't trust him, but because protecting him meant protecting the secret too. Still, I made sure he understood one thing clearly: success isn't always loud. And the people who judge you the hardest often understand the least about your actual life. I watched him grow into a thoughtful, observant young man who noticed everything, even when I thought he wasn't paying attention. He noticed how his grandmother dismissed me. He noticed how his aunt and uncle never asked me genuine questions about my life. He noticed how I came home exhausted some nights, carrying a weight I never explained. What he didn't know was just how much he'd been quietly piecing together over the years. Watching, remembering, connecting details I assumed had gone unnoticed. 3 years ago, my agency finally completed a major case I had led for nearly a decade, dismantling a massive financial fraud network that had defrauded thousands of American families out of their retirement savings. The case made headlines, though my name, of course, was never mentioned publicly. It was the most significant achievement of my career, and once again, I had to sit through family dinners pretending it didn't exist. But Ethan, now 26 and working in cybersecurity himself, had developed professional relationships within circles that occasionally intersected with my world. One evening, during a conference, a colleague mentioned my name in passing, referencing the case my agency had just closed. Unaware that he was speaking to my own son, Ethan came home that night with questions burning behind his eyes. He sat me down and asked directly, "Mom, were you the lead analyst on the Hargrove fraud case?" I remember staring at him, my heart pounding, weighing decades of confidentiality against the relationship with my son. I finally told him pieces of the truth, enough to confirm what he suspected without violating my clearance requirements. I watched his expression shift from disbelief to something that looked like quiet devastation. "All these years," he said, his voice cracking, "Grandma made fun of you. Aunt Karen looked down on you, and you were protecting actual families from losing everything they worked for." I nodded, tears finally falling after years of holding them back. Ethan wrapped his arms around me and said something I'll never forget: "They don't deserve to know how incredible you actually are. But I'm done watching them treat you like nothing." This past Thanksgiving, Ethan asked if he could speak before dinner began. My mother, ever the one craving control of every gathering, reluctantly agreed, probably assuming he wanted to announce a promotion or engagement. Instead, Ethan stood at the head of the table and looked directly at his grandmother. "For 20 years, he began, this family has treated my mother like she was the disappointment. Like she never amounted to anything compared to Aunt Karen and Uncle Mark. I want you all to know the truth now," he proceeded to explain, carefully and respectfully, staying within what little I had shared with him, that I had spent nearly 2 decades working in a classified federal position, protecting American citizens from massive financial crimes, closing cases that genuinely impacted thousands of lives, all while enduring their constant judgment in silence. The table fell completely quiet. My mother's face went pale. Karen set down her wine glass, her hands visibly trembling. Mark stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time in his entire life. What would you have done in that moment, watching 20 years of dismissal crumble in front of you? I didn't say anything at first. I let the silence speak for itself, let them sit in the discomfort they had created for me for so long. My mother finally spoke, her voice shaking. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because I couldn't," I said quietly. "And because every time I tried to explain that my work mattered, you made me feel like nothing I did would ever be enough compared to them." Karen, the sister who built her entire identity around outshining everyone, looked genuinely ashamed for the first time in our relationship. "I'm so sorry, Diane. I had no idea. I wasn't interested in punishing them further. I had spent enough years being punished simply for existing differently than they expected. Instead, I told them calmly that respect shouldn't be reserved only for careers people understand or can brag about at parties. In the months since that Thanksgiving, my relationship with my family has slowly shifted. My mother calls more often now, asking real questions instead of comparing me to my siblings. Karen and I have had honest conversations about the resentment that built between us over the years. Mark, surprisingly, became one of my biggest supporters, telling people proudly now that his sister works in federal intelligence. But honestly, their newfound respect isn't what brought me peace. What brought me peace was realizing that my worth was never tied to their approval in the first place. I spent 20 years believing I needed their validation to feel successful, when really, the work I did quietly, the families I protected, the justice I helped deliver, that was enough all along. Ethan taught me something important through all of this. Sometimes the people who truly see us aren't the ones who raised us, but the ones we raise ourselves. He saw my strength when everyone else saw weakness. He saw my dedication when everyone else saw failure. If there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this: never let other people's narrow definition of success convince you that your quiet, meaningful work doesn't matter. The truth always finds its way to the surface eventually, and when it does, it speaks far louder than any toast ever could. If my story meant something to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below.